Good evening, I'm Alan Murray. The clearest choice in a generation. That's the way President Barack Obama will describe the stakes in November when he speaks tonight. A very important speech for him. He's in a neck-and-neck race with Mitt Romney. He has to convince undecided voters that if he gets elected, the next 4 years will be better than the last. We're joined now by Washington Bureau Chief Jerry Seib, who gets better every year than he was the last. Jerry, great to have you here. Look.
Thank you.
Clearest choice in a generation. That's what we're talking about. The clearest choice in a generation. And you and I have been watching these things for more than a generation. I have to say, after the last 2 weeks, it does feel like a very clear choice.
I think it does. You know, I wrote a column tomorrow for the Journal, Alan, which I said, you know, essentially there was a time, and I'm thinking back to the 1990s, when serious people said, you know, there's not that much difference between the two parties, really, between the two major parties. Well, I don't know of anybody who can say that this year. No serious person who's watched the conventions the last 2 weeks would say that. I think there is a choice. We kind of thought maybe this choice was made in 2008. And that Barack Obama had maybe realigned the country. Well, that didn't really happen, and what's happened subsequently is I think he's been pulled to the left by his party, and Republicans have been pulled to the right by the Tea Party movement. It feels a little bit like 1980 to me, that there really is a divide, a choice, a kind of a path forward for size and shape and role of government over the next 10 years, and that choice is going to be made this year.
Yeah, now, they've put out some advanced talking points on the president's speech. Like Mitt Romney last week, he lays out 5 goals for the country, and some of them are very similar to Mitt Romney's goals. He talks about energy independence. He talks about the importance of education. He talks about deficit reduction. But I think, Jerry, the difference you're talking about has more to do with how you get to those goals. This whole difference between shared purpose and individual enterprise, the difference between the government's role versus business's role, and the whole debate over the size of government. I mean, you really are talking about, as you've pointed out, the difference between, say, 19% of GDP being the federal government and 22, 23%. That may not sound like a big difference, but in fact, it is, right?
No, it is. It's $6 trillion or so, maybe probably more than that over the next decade if you play that out. That's big money in anybody's terms, and that is kind of the choice you're making. And it's not just dollars, though. It is a sort of a question about what role does the government play in a 21st century economy. You know, the goals that President Obama is going to talk about tonight, you just referred to them. We know some of them based on the excerpts of the speech that have been put out early. They reflect that a little bit. They talk about using government to hold down college tuition costs or to achieve energy independence, as you say. Although I have to say the goals are kind of familiar. I think most of them are goals that he laid out previously, mostly in the State of the Union address this year, or they're relatively small bore. So I think that section of the speech, the goals that are described there, probably give us only a sort of a small hint of what we're going to see later tonight.
Jerry, one of the things about Democratic conventions is the celebrities turn out in force. We had Eva Longoria earlier tonight, James Taylor singing, Ashley Judd, the Foo Fighters, Scarlett Johansson, Mark Anthony. Does that make any difference?
You know, I've never been convinced this does, to be totally honest with you. You know, the Democrats always seem to do better than the Republicans on the star power front, and that was probably true this year as well. Although, you know, there was Clint Eastwood at Tampa, Alan, and maybe that evened the scores a little bit. But, I'll tell you, it might make people watch the convention a little bit more, and that probably helps. But, I think this, particularly in a year like this, it feels a little too serious to be swayed by star power.
Do we know anything yet about how the events in Charlotte are playing with the country at large, and particularly the undecided voters, the people who hold the difference between these two candidates in November?
Not yet, although I think the viewership of the last night's proceedings, in particular the night before, was probably a little better than Democrats feared. You know, it hasn't been a great year for convention viewership. I think the Republicans found that in Tampa. And I think that the part of the goal here is probably to convince the base as much as to convince those independent swing voters. And base voters tend to watch these things much more than people in the middle do. So I think there are 2 tests for these conventions. One is, have you fired up the base? And that's what you tend to get in speeches like, for example, the one Elizabeth Warren gave last night. And have you reached some swing voters? This is the night you reach swing voters, because those kind of people who are more casual, less committed observers to the political scene, they tune in to watch the nominee or the president. So I think you can't judge that until you see how Barack Obama does tonight, and then find out whether people really were tuned into it.
Fair amount of focus tonight on foreign policy. You had John Kerry speaking.
Yeah.
No question Joe Biden will focus some on foreign policy. The Democrats seem to think this is a plus for them in the upcoming election. Do you think that's right?
I do think it's right. I don't think it matters a whole lot that it's a plus, but I do think it is a plus. You know, what most Americans remember about foreign policy is that Osama bin Laden is dead, and Joe Biden's got a great line he's been using. I think it works. He says, because of President Obama, GM is alive and Osama bin Laden is dead. Well, that's a symbol for people that he's successfully pulled back from some of the prosecution of the war on terror, got troops out of Iraq, got to Osama bin Laden, is winding down in Afghanistan. Now, the Republicans will tell you all those places are going to be left less stable and potentially dangerous spots in the future for the U.S., but I'm not sure that's where Americans' heads are right now. I think they just want to stay out of that sort of thing until the economy gets fixed. And they're worried about Iran, and they probably wish the president had done more on that front. But I think all things considered, it's a pretty good record for the president. There's an interesting line in Joe Biden's speech, Al, we've seen some of those excerpts in which he ties these two things together. He says that, Mitt Romney said the first thing he's going to do after his convention is after he's elected president is go on a jobs tour. And considering how much he's outsourced jobs overseas, it's going to have to be a foreign tour. So
yeah.
you can a little preview there for Joe Biden's speech.
Jerry, one of the things that I know and happens when you get all these politicians in the bubble at the convention, and you get a whole bunch of reporters in the bubble as well, a certain sort of internal momentum takes hold. I have to say, I've never seen so much swooning in the press as I saw over the Clinton speech last night. Was it really that good?
Because compared to what? There's not been a year of great political oratory. And I think there was a kind of a sense that people had that this would be the night when you saw whether Bill Clinton, who really is probably our generation's master politician, whether he still had it. And he still has it. It was a good speech. It would have been a better speech at 15 minutes less length, but it was still a good speech. And I think, after basically a year in which there hasn't been, most people don't think this has been a great campaign. If you're just into the art of covering campaigns and watching them as a spectator sport, it's been somewhat dispiriting and not very uplifting. Well, you got a little bit of that old spark, and I think that's probably helps explain some of the reaction. I will tell you that Democrats here in this convention think that Bill Clinton made the best case for re-electing Barack Obama that anybody's made, and that includes Barack Obama himself.
Yeah, now Barack Obama came out on the stage to greet Bill Clinton last night. Any sightings of him today? Do we know what he's been up to all day today in preparation for this speech, which clearly is a very important speech for him?
Pretty totally hunkered down. He did make one appearance by phone. He called supporters of his who had tickets to go to the speech tonight in the football stadium, the Carolina Panthers football stadium, outside. And they're not going to get to see him because the event was moved indoors here because of fear of thunderstorms. So you had, thousands and thousands of Obama supporters who were disappointed. He did make a conference call to those people. They arranged for the people who had tickets to call into a number, and the president spoke to them for a few minutes. But basically, it's been low key and sort of below the radar screen, and that's pretty normal the night you make an acceptance speech.
Yeah. And Jerry, we know, of course, that Barack Obama can give a good speech, and most likely will give a good speech tonight. But what are you really looking for here? What can he say that'll make a difference in the dynamic of the campaign?
Well, I think one of the interesting things that I'll be looking for is whether he's going to talk about an explanation of what happened and what didn't happen over the last 4 years, or if he's just going to decide Bill Clinton dealt with that by taking the Republican critique apart last night and pivot and go forward. Here's where we're headed from here. I kind of think it's going to be the latter. I don't think you don't sort of explain things that have disappointed people in a speech like this so much as you tell them, here's where we're going. And this probably takes you back to that thing we were talking about at the outset, Alan, which is a real choice. And, one of the successes of the Obama campaign over the last couple of months has been to define this race as something even the Republicans now call it a choice. The Republicans wanted a referendum on the last 4 years. Why wasn't it better? Why aren't more people in jobs? Why is the unemployment rate still over 8%? What they've got is a campaign that's framed as a choice between a vision of Barack Obama's economy in which the government plays a more activist role and kind of tries to move people ahead, and one in the Mitt Romney mold that says essentially that's the wrong role for government, that's how we got into this mess, step back, lower the tax rates, let free enterprise create a broad prosperity and everybody benefits. That's a choice, it's a big choice, that's how the election's framed, and that's what I think Barack Obama wants people to see it as.
All right, Jerry, thanks for that preview. Hope we'll have you back after the speech later this evening.